Riley, come on, buddy, we talked about this, Xander Templeton pleaded, chasing after his 5-year-old son who had just launched a half-eaten banana into the duck pond. We don't feed bananas to ducks. Riley looked up at him with the pure defiance only a kindergartner could muster. But they look hungry. Xander let out a breath, running a hand through his messy dark hair. He was exhausted working double shifts at the garage, trying to make rent, and somehow still showing up for his son every afternoon at the park because it was free and Riley loved the swings. But today, Xander was losing the battle. Riley had already tried to pet a squirrel, stolen a stranger's juice box, and was now on his second meltdown of the hour. He plopped down on a bench, defeated. "Need some backup," a soft voice said beside him. He turned and saw her long brown hair pulled into a braid, sunglasses resting on her head, and a calm, confident smile that didn't look forced like most strangers who tried to make small talk with a single parent. She wore jeans, leather boots, and a navy blouse that somehow looked expensive without trying. She held a coffee in one hand and a dog leash in the other, though the golden retriever at her feet looked more relaxed than most yoga instructors. "Do you have kids?" Xander asked, immediately embarrassed at how desperate he sounded. She laughed, not mockingly warmly. "No, but I have 8 nieces and nephews, and I practically raised 2 of them. You learn a few tricks." He blinked. "Wait, seriously, could you, do you have any tips for tantrums or ducks or life?" She smiled again, and it hit him in the chest this time. "I've got a few." Xander watched in awe as she crouched down next to Riley, who was now inspecting a worm on the sidewalk. "Hey, you know ducks way prefer seeds, right? Bananas give them tummy aches," she said. Riley looked up at her with wide eyes. "Really?" "Really, if you want, I can show you the duck food I keep in my bag." "You have duck food in your purse?" Xander asked, stunned. "You'd be surprised what fits in a woman's handbag," she said with a wink and handed Riley a small plastic bag of birdseed. Xander laughed, the tension in his chest finally loosening. "You're some kind of wizard." She stood up, brushing her hands. "I'm Reagan Langford." "Xander Templeton, that's Riley, he's 5, and Chaos." Reagan knelt again to fist bump Riley. "Chaos is cool, man." "Can I sit here?" she asked. "Please." They sat in silence for a beat, watching Riley toss seeds at the ducks like a tiny tornado of joy. Xander glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. She didn't look like someone who came to this park often. Her boots were clean, her nails manicured, and her watch had a subtle sparkle that didn't come from the mall. "So what do you do?" he asked. "Oh, I'm in investments." She said it casually, like she worked a desk job. "Kind of boring, really." Xander nodded. "I work at Marty's Auto on 82nd. Fix engines, work on brakes. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, mostly." She tilted her head. "That's not boring, that's real, and you're doing it while raising your son? That's impressive." He looked away, unsure how to respond. No one ever said that to him, not sincerely. "So, do you really carry duck food around all the time?" She laughed. "Only when I'm walking my dog. Ducks love Daisy." Daisy wagged her tail in agreement. They talked for another hour while Riley played. Xander found himself telling her about Riley's obsession with dinosaurs, how he cut the crust off his sandwiches, how he'd been asking for a mom lately and it broke his heart because he didn't have an answer. Reagan listened, eyes soft, nodding like she actually cared, and not out of pity, there was something else in her expression. Admiration. Warmth. When it was time to go, Riley clung to Reagan's leg. "Can she come again?" he asked. Reagan crouched to his level. "I'll be here tomorrow, same time, okay?" "Promise." "Pinky swear." She locked fingers with him and gave Xander a quick look. "If that's okay with Dad." Xander nodded, trying not to smile like an idiot. They parted ways, but Reagan turned back once, catching his eyes again. "You're a good dad, Xander." He stood there long after she left, heart pounding. He had no idea that the woman who just handed his son duck food and made his entire week was actually one of the richest women in New York. And Reagan, well, she knew exactly who she was falling for. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting golden patches of light across the park grass. Reagan sat cross-legged on the blanket she'd brought this time, watching Riley stack sticks into a wobbly tower while Daisy lounged beside her, panting lazily. She wasn't sure what had compelled her to return the next day, curiosity maybe, or something heavier she hadn't let herself name yet. Xander arrived 10 minutes late, jogging up with apologies tumbling out. "Sorry," Riley refused to wear anything but his dinosaur cape. "Took us a full negotiation round." Reagan laughed genuinely. "He looks like a very fierce T-Rex." Riley roared in agreement, spinning in a circle before collapsing onto the grass. Xander dropped onto the blanket beside her, jeans dusty, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Thanks for coming back." "You sound surprised." "I kind of am." She turned to him, eyebrow raised. "Why?" "Most people don't make it to day 2. You know, after the juice box theft and the worm incident." "I like a little chaos," she said, then leaned in slightly. "Besides, you didn't run either." He looked away, but not before she caught the corner of his reluctant smile. "So," she said, brushing a leaf from her knee, "are you always this exhausted, or is today special?" He gave a short laugh. "Today's actually better than most. On Thursdays, my boss doesn't yell until noon." "Sounds charming." He's 72 and swears more creatively than anyone I've ever met. Reagan tilted her head. "You ever think about leaving?" Xander shrugged. "And do what exactly? I didn't finish school. I know engines, brake lines, and how to keep a 5-year-old from eating glue. That's about it." "I think you're underselling yourself." He looked at her then, as if the weight of her words pressed into something he didn't usually let anyone touch. "That's kind of you to say, but kind words don't pay for field trips." Reagan watched him for a moment, her hands nodding in her lap. "What if you had the opportunity to do more? Would you take it?" He gave a dry laugh. "Sure, if it came with health insurance and a miracle." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thermos. "Coffee." He blinked. "You brought coffee." "I figured a man raising a kid alone probably doesn't get many hot drinks." He accepted the cup, fingers brushing hers. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's done for me all year." They sat in silence for a while, sipping. Riley continued his stick architecture, occasionally calling for approval. Reagan cheered each new addition like it was a feat of engineering. Xander watched her, the way she gave her attention so freely. No rush, no checking her phone, just there. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course." "You said you're in investments. What does that actually mean?" Reagan hesitated. "Technically, I oversee a portfolio of companies. I sit on a few boards. I manage assets." His brow furrowed. "Like corporate stuff." "Exactly." "You must be really good at it." "I like to think so," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Do you work from home?" "Sometimes, travel a lot too." He nodded, digesting that. "What about Riley's mom?" she asked gently. He didn't answer right away. Then, she left when he was 1, said she wasn't built for motherhood. Haven't heard from her since. Reagan reached over, her hand grazing his. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, jaw tight. "I got used to doing it alone." "You shouldn't have had to." He looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. "I don't really do the whole talk about feelings thing." "That's okay, I talk enough for 2." He chuckled softly, then glanced at his son. He's been asking questions lately. About moms, I never know what to say. Tell him the truth. That families come in all shapes. That love is what matters most. You make it sound simple. It is to kids. It's adults who complicate everything. He studied her calm confidence, the ease she carried even when the conversation drifted into hard places. You ever want a family? She didn't answer immediately. I used to think I had to choose between success and connection, but lately, I'm not so sure. He nodded slowly, like he understood that more than he wanted to admit. Riley ran over, clutching a lopsided crown made of twigs. I made it for you, he said, placing it on Reagan's head. She adjusted it with mock seriousness. How do I look? Like a tree queen, he said proudly. Xander laughed. He gives out titles like candy. He has excellent taste, she said, nudging Xander with her shoulder. The sun began to dip lower, shadows stretching across the grass. Reagan stood, brushing off her jeans. Same time tomorrow, she asked. He paused. You really want to? I wouldn't offer if I didn't. He nodded, then yes, tomorrow. She gathered her things, gave Daisy a quick pat and turned to go. But halfway across the park, she stopped and looked back. Xander. Yeah. You're doing better than you think. He didn't respond, but she saw the way his jaw shifted, the way his shoulders lifted just slightly, and that was enough. As she walked away, her phone buzzed. A reminder for the Langford Foundation's gala, a guest list of politicians and CEOs, and a note to finalize the press release about her latest acquisition. She turned the screen off without reading the rest. Tomorrow, she'd be back on that blanket with a coffee, a goofy little boy, and a man who didn't know she could buy the entire block if she wanted to. And she didn't want any of it. She just wanted him. The sky cracked open with the first roll of thunder just as Xander pulled Riley's raincoat over his head. The forecast had promised scattered showers, but the downpour that followed was anything but scattered. They stood beneath the narrow awning of the coffee kiosk by the park entrance, Riley clutching his toy pterodactyl while bouncing on his toes. She's not coming today, is she? Riley asked, watching the rain as though it had personally betrayed him. She might still show, Xander said, though he doubted it. The park was nearly empty, the paths glazed with puddles. But hey, I brought snacks. We can make a tent out of the blanket in the trunk. Riley looked unimpressed. She brings better snacks. Xander laughed under his breath. Yeah, she does. But just as he turned to suggest heading back to the car, a sleek black SUV pulled up by the curb. The driver stepped out, umbrella in hand, and opened the back door. Reagan stepped out, wearing jeans tucked into riding boots and a navy trench coat belted at the waist. She took the umbrella, nodded at the driver, and walked briskly toward them, the umbrella barely shielding her from the wind. You're actually here, Xander said as she reached them. I told Riley I'd be, didn't I? Reagan looked down at the little boy. You didn't think I'd let a few raindrops scare me, right? Riley beamed, then pointed to her umbrella. That looks like a sword. Reagan knelt beside him, lowering her voice. It's not just a sword, it's a weather blade. Only the bravest knights carry them. Xander blinked. You really commit to the bit. Reagan stood and held the umbrella over them both. Come on. I know a place nearby with a covered patio and the best hot chocolate in the city. You're serious? Completely. He hesitated, glancing at Riley, who was already tugging at Reagan's hand. You sure it's not too much trouble? Her eyes met his. I wouldn't offer if it was. The cafe she led them to wasn't one Xander had ever noticed before. Tucked behind a boutique hotel, it had lanterns strung across the canopy and tables dressed in crisp linens, a strange level of elegance for a neighborhood that mostly smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. A waiter greeted Reagan by name and swept them to a table without waiting for her to ask. "You've been here before?" Xander asked, pulling Riley's hood down. "Once or twice," Reagan replied lightly. "The chef's a friend." The waiter returned with a tray of drinks before they could order 2 mugs of dark, rich hot chocolate, topped with shaved chocolate curls, and a thick ceramic cup of coffee for Xander. He frowned. "You didn't even tell them what we wanted." "They remembered," she said simply. Xander stared at her across the table, a strange weight settling in his chest. That wasn't normal. People didn't get this kind of treatment at cafes unless they were someone. And Reagan, she kept shrugging it off like it was nothing. "Okay," he said carefully. "I have to ask, what kind of investments are we talking about exactly?" Reagan folded her hands in front of her, her expression unreadable. "The Langford Group." Xander paused. That's the name on the skyscraper downtown." "Yes." He blinked. "The one with the rooftop helipad." She nodded. Xander stared at her. "You run that?" "I own it." He sat back, stunned into silence. Riley, oblivious, was now dipping a marshmallow into his drink with surgical precision. "You're a billionaire." "Yes." He let out a soft breath, unsure whether to laugh or get up and walk in circles. "Okay, that's unexpected." "I didn't lie," Reagan said gently. "You asked what I did. I told you. I just didn't lead with the number of zeros." Xander looked away, jaw tight. "Why would someone like you spend time with someone like me?" She didn't flinch. "Is that really how you see yourself?" "I'm a mechanic who can barely cover rent," he said flatly. "You have a private driver." "I also have insomnia, a complicated family legacy, and no one in my life who treats me like I'm anything but a company. You, on the other hand, listen. You care. You show up for your son when you're dead on your feet. That's rare, Xander." He didn't speak for a long moment. "You should have told me." "I wanted to. I was going to, but I didn't want it to change things." "It does change things." Reagan nodded slowly, then let it. He narrowed his eyes. "You think can just step into your world like it's nothing." "I don't want you to step into my world," Reagan said, voice low. "I want to make space in it for you, for Riley, if you'll let me." The wind picked up, rattling the lanterns overhead. Riley giggled at the sound, then offered Reagan the last marshmallow from his cup. She accepted it with a smile and ruffled his hair. Xander watched them, the billionaire and the boy, and felt something crack open inside him, something he'd kept locked away behind years of struggle. "I don't know how to belong in your life," he said honestly. "You already do," she replied. "You just haven't realized it yet." He looked down at his coffee, then back at her. "If we do this, it's not going to be simple." "I'm not interested in simple," she said, reaching across the table. "I'm interested in real." When her fingers brushed his, he didn't pull away. And for the first time in years, Xander felt like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry all of it alone. 3 weeks later, Xander straightened the collar of the crisp gray shirt hanging uncomfortably on his shoulders. It was new. Reagan had sent a box of clothes, claiming it was a thank you for letting her tag along on their park dates. He'd refused at first. She'd insisted with a note tucked inside. "You wear grease like armor. I thought you might like something that breathes." Tonight wasn't a park date. Tonight was a gala. He adjusted the sleeves again and glanced down at Riley, who wore a tiny navy blazer and matching sneakers. "Are you sure it can't just wear my Dino hoodie?" Riley asked, poking at the lapel. Xander crouched. "She said it's a fancy thing. We've got to look sharp, buddy." "But there's no dinosaurs." "There's probably crab cakes, though." Riley lit up, "Like the ones with sauce?" Exactly like those. The black car pulled into the curb outside their building, and the driver stepped out to open the door. Xander hesitated. "You ready?" he asked his son. Riley gave a solemn nod. "For the crab cakes." They climbed in. The hotel was nothing like anywhere Xander had ever been. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Waiters in black ties moved like dancers through crowds of people dressed in gowns and tuxedos. Every surface gleamed. Reagan stood near the staircase, talking to a man with silver hair and a sharp jaw. She wore a deep midnight blue dress, structured, bold, and unlike anything he'd seen her in before. It wasn't just elegant, it was powerful. When she saw them, her face softened. She excused herself and crossed the floor in swift, quiet steps. "You made it," she said, touching Riley's shoulder gently. "Are there crab cakes?" he asked immediately. Reagan laughed, past Trey to the left of the fountain. He ran off in that direction, clearly on a mission. Xander looked around. "This place is not what I expected." "I know it's a lot, but I wanted you to see it." He glanced at her, unsure. "Why?" "Because this is where I live, the other part of me, and I want you to understand it before you decide if you can live in it too." He swallowed. "That guy you were talking to, he looked like he wanted to eat me alive." "My cousin, he thinks I'm reckless." "For bringing your date to a charity gala." "For falling in love with someone who doesn't care about titles." Xander stared at her. "You said." "I haven't said it yet, but I do. I love you, Xander." He stepped back, stunned. "You, what?" "I know it's fast, but it's true. You've changed the way I look at everything. You and Riley, you're the only part of my life that feels real." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A waiter passed by. Reagan took a glass from his tray and handed it to Xander. "This is champagne. It's overpriced and overrated. But tonight, I want to toast to the man who reminds me I'm more than my bank account." He stared at the glass, then at her. "I'm not going to be some project for you, Reagan." "You're not. You're the man can't stop thinking about when I'm in boardrooms. You're the reason I sleep through the night now. You've never tried to impress me, and that's exactly why you have." He exhaled, tension rolling off his shoulders. "I don't know how to live in your world." "You don't have to. I'll meet you in the middle." Before he could respond, Riley came barreling back, mouth full. "They have duck-shaped cookies, too." Xander bent down. "You having fun?" Riley nodded. "Can we stay with her forever?" Reagan crouched beside him. "I was hoping you'd say that." Xander looked at them, both his son and the woman who'd walked into their lives with duck food and a quiet, unstoppable kindness, and something inside him finally gave way. "I love you too," he said, voice rough. "I didn't think I could feel this way again, but I do." Reagan stood, taking his hand. "Then let's stop pretending this is complicated." They spent the rest of the evening side by side. When the music started, Reagan pulled Xander onto the dance floor. He stumbled through the first few steps until she whispered, "Just follow me." And he did. A week later, she invited them to a rooftop dinner, not at a restaurant, but at her penthouse. The view stretched across the skyline, glittering and infinite. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Riley fell asleep after dessert, curled on a couch with Daisy at his feet. Xander stood at the railing, watching the lights. Reagan joined him. "You're quiet." "I'm trying to figure out how it got here." "You asked for parenting tips," she said, smiling, "and I fell in love." He turned to her. "I meant what I said. I'm all in, but I need to do this right for him." "So do it right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. She froze. "I don't have a yacht. I don't have a legacy. But I've got a son who already thinks you're magic. And I've got the kind of love that doesn't come with conditions. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver ring, simple and elegant. Reagan Langford, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes. They kissed beneath the stars, the city glowing around them. And for the first time in both their lives, they weren't trying to escape anything. They were building something new, messy, beautiful, and entirely theirs. The ceremony was held on the Langford estate in the Hudson Valley, surrounded by towering oaks, blooming azaleas, and a marble terrace that glowed in the golden hour light. A string quartet played somewhere beyond the hedges, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted through the air. The wedding was small, intimate, by choice with only a handful of people who mattered most. Reagan stood at the top of the terrace steps in a gown that shimmered like starlight, her hair swept into a soft twist that left a few strands loose around her face. At her side, Riley tugged at his bow tie, his shoes scuffed from exploring the gardens before the ceremony started. "Can I carry the rings now?" he asked, peeking up at her. She bent slightly, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Only if you promise not to drop them in the koi pond." "I won't," he said solemnly. "I practiced." Down below, Xander adjusted the cuffs of his tailored jacket, the fabric unfamiliar but comfortable enough now. He stood beside a floral archway overlooking the valley, his eyes fixed on her as if the rest of the world had gone quiet. There was no crowd, no press, no flashing cameras, just the three of them, and the life they were about to begin. As Reagan stepped down the stone steps with Riley at her side, everything else faded. She reached Xander, her hand sliding into his, and for a beat, they just stared at each other. "You ready?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." The officiant spoke, but the words blurred beneath the rush of everything unspoken between them. When it came time for vows, Xander spoke first. "I didn't grow up with much. I didn't think I had anything to give someone like you, but you never needed the right last name or a bank account. You just needed someone who would show up and stay. That's what I promise, every day, for the rest of my life." Reagan's lips trembled slightly as she took the ring from Riley's outstretched palm. "I spent so long building a life I thought I had to protect. Every decision was calculated, every moment controlled. Then you crashed into it with engine grease and a crooked smile, and suddenly everything I thought I needed didn't matter. You and Riley, you're what's real, and I've never been more certain of anything than this." They exchanged rings under the arch, and when the officiant gave them permission, Reagan didn't wait. She pulled Xander into a kiss that silenced the birds in the trees. Riley clapped and shouted, "Finally." Afterward, they had dinner under a canopy of twinkling lights strung between trees. There was no ballroom, no assigned seating, just long tables draped in linen, candlelight flickering off crystal glasses, and plates of food that made even Riley pause in excitement. Xander's former co-workers from the garage came, dressed in borrowed suits, trying not to gawk at the estate. Reagan greeted each of them by name, introduced them to her board members as the people who actually know how to fix things, and made sure they left with gift baskets more lavish than most people's Christmas bonuses. Later that night, Reagan pulled Xander aside near the edge of the woods where the lights didn't quite reach. Fireflies blinked lazily between them. "There's something I want to give you," she said, holding out a manila envelope. He opened it, frowning as he slid out the papers. "What is this?" "An offer for a business loan. Backed by Langford Capital, interest-free, you'll be the sole owner. Found a location near the school Riley's enrolled in for the fall, bigger than Marty's, and you'd be the boss." Xander stared at her. "You're giving me a shop." "I'm not giving you anything. I'm investing in you." He looked at the papers, then up at her. "I don't know what to say." "You already did, when you said you wanted to do this right. This is right, your way." He folded the papers back into the envelope and slid an arm around her waist. I married a genius. She grinned. Flattery will get you everywhere. They stayed there a while, wrapped in the quiet embrace of a life they'd built from two completely different worlds, now stitched together by trust, choice, and the kind of love neither of them had expected, but both had fought for. Weeks passed, then months. Xander opened Templeton Auto and Performance with a grand opening that saw half the town show up. Reagan cut the ribbon with Riley holding her hand, and Xander gave tours of the new bays with a confidence he hadn't known he had. Riley started kindergarten that fall. Reagan packed his lunch every morning with handwritten notes inside, and Xander walked him to the gate, always staying until Riley turned and waved. They bought a house modest, with a wraparound porch and enough yard for Daisy to roam, but it had a view of the woods and a garden they planted together. Reagan worked from her home office most days, but when she wasn't on calls, she was in the kitchen with Riley baking disasters that occasionally turned out edible. One evening, Xander came home to find her barefoot in the living room, dancing with Riley to an old jazz record. He dropped his keys, walked over, and joined them spinning Reagan beneath the soft light of their home, her laughter filling every corner. There were no gala gowns, no boardroom battles, no duck ponds or coffee kiosks. Just the three of them, tangled together in a life that wasn't perfect, but was entirely theirs. And it was enough. It was everything,